Well, thank you for coming back again this week. Well, welcome to the world of voter fraud. It seems that it's a growing problem, particularly this election, and it will be a growing problem until somebody does something about it in their local communities, in their counties, and in their states. Just to give you an idea of how bad it's gotten across the country, we have reports from North Carolina, Ohio, Texas, Nevada, Florida, Pennsylvania, Colorado, New York, New Hampshire, and maybe even Wisconsin. We haven't nailed that one down yet. Of course, you'll notice that I left out Chicago. That's a gimme. It's always voter fraud in the city of Chicago. But in areas like Philadelphia, for instance, where Republican Party watchers were extricated from the polling areas and not allowed to stay, and those precincts just happened to vote 99% for Obama after these Republicans were told to leave physically. There are just too many instances of 99% voting all across the country. And as I reported last week, in some areas, even more than those were registered were counted. We see that in other instances as well. The particular instance that I heard firsthand, basically, from New Hampshire, was that they have a very large polling place in one rural town. About 17,000 people vote in one spot in this town. Well, it just happens that about 1,500, maybe more than that, showed up after the sun went down to register to vote. That's about 10% of the vote. That is very unusual. Nobody's looking into it, of course. If you're in the outs, you can't very well do much about it. But the classic thing that's going on right now is the West case in Florida, where there is apparently some obvious voter problems there. These things have been going on forever. And I asked the question, where's Romney? Wouldn't you think that he would come forward and say, hey, wait a minute, there's enough evidence of something here that maybe we should be involved? Where's the Republican Party? Well, you'll never hear about the Republican Party about voter fraud if it is concerned with getting somebody stopped at the polls who's a constitutionalist or anywhere near a constitutionalist. That is no means the case in this particular election, nor was it the case in the John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon election, when it was obvious that voter fraud in Illinois, Chicago specifically, and some in Texas, could very well have turned the election to Nixon rather than John Kennedy, as was the case. But the Republican Party did nothing, even though local Republican Party people wanted something done. As is the case as well in Southern California. We know that in the race with Dornan, who was a pretty good man, maybe not a constitutionalist, but pretty close. He was taken out in one election because of the illegal alien voting. He tried to get something done. The Republican Party wouldn't back him up in it, and so there you have it. The Republican Party, apparently, at the top, is not interested in local good elections, and in whether it's for president or anything else. They just don't get involved in that sort of thing. And you have to ask the question, why? Now, I think I know the answer. You'll have to figure out the answer for your own. But at the top, just a clue, the parties are both financed by the same people and controlled by the same people. Those of us at the bottom, we think that this party is different from another. But in reality, when you get out of the local area, in some states, it changes. In some states, they're good. But nationally, the party is not the party of conservatives and constitutionalists. And the idea that they don't go in and do anything about voter fraud when it means the election of Republicans, that tells you an awful lot about the hierarchy of the party. I'll leave it up to you. The thing that they always use is semantics. Here's one, for instance, the media, I mean. Workers across Europe synchronize their protests. A, these are workers, and B, they're synchronizing their efforts. Well, A, they're not workers, These are communist and socialist controlled unions. And B, they're not synchronizing, they're coordinating. There's a difference in the terminology. They just all don't meet on a certain hour at the same time in city after city after city and march and protest and do the various things that are the residual effect of such activity, simply because they all decided, gee, they're doing it over there, we'll do it at the same time. These things are coordinated, so they're not synchronized in the sense of the term. I recall back in the 1960s and 70s, you could never get the media, for instance, to talk about the fact that the violence that was occurring in the inner cities of our country during the so-called civil rights movement and the anti-war movement had any connection with one another, that they were all independent. These riots, these demonstrations, these various things that were going on were just spontaneous uprisings of protesters. It didn't matter that on the same day, at the same hour, from city after city after city, the inner cities were torched, all set ablaze at the same time, that they all came to an independent thought that on this hour, on this day, I'm going to get a Molotov cocktail and I'm going to throw it into the main street store. Those things don't happen that way. These things are coordinated. They don't want to let you know just how much of a problem there is in the coordination of these things through the socialist movement, which, by the way, now that I bring that up, the Socialist Party, in case you didn't know, endorsed Obama for re-election. The media didn't tell you about that before the election. Nor did they tell you back in 1974 that they were going to transform the Democratic Party. They were going to make it into their own. We know that this last Congress, there were a minimum of 70 people who belonged to this new Socialist Party name, the Social Democrats. We imagine that there are more there in this Congress than in the last. By the way, even before that, they had ceased to have a presidential candidate on the Socialist Party when they had done it forever. In fact, Norman Thomas, who was the head of the Socialist Party back in the Republican administration of Dwight David Eisenhower, says we're not going to run candidates for president anymore because most of the things that we've advocated over the years are coming to fruition anyway, and we're doing a great job of getting these things done through a variety of administrations, including the Eisenhower administration. By the way, your papers are all full of the new change in China, that these new Chinese communists aren't the same old Chinese communists, that somehow these are some sort of transformed individuals into benevolent capitalists. Don't fall for it. This new fellow who's in China, and I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name, they are the same old communist individuals. He's the son of one of the men who worked alongside of Mao Zedong. That one I can't pronounce. But at any rate, the thing is that they are trying to convince the American businessman, particularly the American voter and consumer, that China is somehow mellowing. It's not mellowing at all. This guy is a hardliner. He has been in the past in charge of communist training schools, teaching the Communist Party line, the same old Marxist, Maoist baloney that they've always had. He may smile when he comes on stage, but so does Obama. Another thing that we see in regard to what's going on around the world is in the Congo. You know, the original charter of the United Nations said that the United Nations could not become involved in the internal affairs of a country, that was not their function. It was to keep countries from warring. But a transition has occurred over the years to where now the UN interjects itself into the countries that may have civil war going on or civil unrest and that sort of thing. And they're doing it again in the Congo. This is something that sets a precedence. And it could be a precedence in any country to be carried out there if there is civil unrest or a civil war or whatever the case may be. This is something, a development in the UN that is very, very dangerous. Lastly, I just want to tell you some of my own experience. You may have seen this advertisement in the New York Times, and of course it's Obama, and it says, yes, you can, but it's an advertisement for the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And of course, they're promoting Obama before the election and everything else. I used to be a member of the ACLU years ago, not under my name, but under an assumed name because I wanted to get their material and everything else. I had, because of some other activities that I was doing, had the names of a wide number of Communist Party members where I lived. Too many of them showed up as officers in the local American Civil Liberties unit. To give you an idea, these people will say that they profess to be for civil rights, the Bill of Rights, and all the rest of it. But for 50 years, Roger Baldwin was the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, and he says the goal was to promote communism. That was the man who ran the American Civil Liberties Union. You see that they use the Bill of Rights to actually destroy the Bill of Rights. They're the organization behind getting God out of the school and everything else, and they have a purpose to it. And it's a purpose that is not part of what they say publicly. It's something that they say amongst themselves privately. Until next week, we'll see you then.